Hello and welcome to the first ever official Paper Talk. And what we hope it will be is a series of interviews with people we admire from the sphere of music, and it's an opportunity to kind of do something a bit more long form and find out what makes them tick and have a bit of a conversation rather than a formal interview. And we've got a few people I'm hoping to line up. We'll see. I haven't sent the emails out, and we'll probably release them in bunches of maybe 4 or 5. And I'm very pleased to be interviewing a friend of the label, Bill Brewster. Our paths have crossed many times with Bill in the past. He's done a DJ mix for Paper Recordings when we first kind of rebooted it. Crikey, I don't know how many years ago, 10 years ago or so. He was involved in Northern Disco Lights in the film. He was a great interviewee in there because he's a big fan of Norwegian music. And I kind of can remember him running Twisted UK when Tribal had finished, and there was Twisted US and Twisted UK, and he's always been there, on the dance scene as a purveyor of good taste. And he's one of those people, which I mentioned in the interview, that he has this encyclopedic knowledge of music. And if you listen to his 16 loop weekly show, Paradise Farage, and he picks a genre every week and plays 2 hours of records for it, DJs it together, and it ranges from Italo, post-punk, British house, US house, garage. I mean, you kind of think as it goes on, the genres kind of get more niche. But so really interesting to talk to him about music. And of course, we've always, he's such a good author, and as we touch on that in the interview as well, about how he was certainly from over here make a thing of writing about dance music and the effect that had and what came afterwards. And I'm also very grateful to him because I've been trying to run a program called Zencaster, which kind of worked. I road tested it before we did the interview, and it all worked fine, along with Zoom. And of course, without as you could have predicted, it all went absolutely tits up on the day. So I had a total technological breakdown right in the middle, and he was very, very understanding and patient. So I'm extra big thank you to Bill for that. So here we are, the first ever Paper Talk. I hope you enjoy it with, as he calls himself, professional enthusiast Bill Brewster. So how you doing anyway?
Yeah, good. Yeah, no, all right, actually, considering, we've had a bit of a shitty year for dance music in a lot of ways, but I've seen it as a challenge, really. Try and earn a living somehow in the middle of a shit show.
Well, that's a good question. How do you earn a living at the moment? Yeah, because when you look at the COVID and industries, and you kind of think, well, for DJs and musicians, it's like the worst of all worlds, really.
Yeah, well, obviously I lost a lot of income because there's no DJing. Probably 60 to 65% of my income comes from DJing. So yeah, it's been challenging for sure. But I've tried to put into process lots of different new projects, come up with ideas for projects. We're doing a new edition of Last Night a DJ Saved My Life. That's one of the projects that I'm doing. We found a new publisher for it, so we're moving it to White Rabbit Publishers. We're going to write another book immediately after that for White Rabbit as well. So that's 2 projects. I've worked on 2 compilations this year, and I've got 2 more on the go at the moment. So I've just been trying to think up different project ideas, really, just to bring in a little bit of money, however little it is. And then obviously I've been getting the government grants as well, which have helped quite a lot. And learning to survive on a lot less money. Yeah. But that doesn't bother me too much. My needs are relatively modest. I'm not particularly acquisitive. As long as I've got a bit of money to buy food and clothe my kids and buy a bit of music, then I'm all good, really.
Well, it's that thing, isn't it, that kind of ironically the DJs and what have you have got all their eggs in one basket are kind of in a more difficult position than possibly other people who've got their eggs in a lot of different baskets, because you can kind of spread yourself out. But I mean, if you're a full-time DJ and that's how you earn your living, I mean,
it must be very, very tough. And I mean, I'm really grateful that I don't just do that I do lots of different things, because I don't know what I'd be doing otherwise. The little bits of other work that I do bring in money. So, I get royalties still from my books are continuing to sell, and I get royalties from that. That's very helpful. I've got a retainer for Late Night Tales because I do a lot of work with them. So there's a few little bits of guaranteed income every month that have made a big difference. So it's certainly not been an ideal year, but I'm certainly a lot better off than plenty of other people. So I can't really complain.
And how do you think COVID is going to change clubbing? I mean, I guess it's trying to look into a silver ball, crystal ball, but it feels like such a seismic shift, because I mean the beauty of clubbing is being able to go out and it's that shared experience. And I went to Escape to Freight Island a few weeks ago, and you kind of, on the face of it, it's the future for the moment, because you go in and it's all socially distanced and really nice venue and decent sound system, DJs, but you kind of got there and you just sat at your little table and it was just like, this isn't what it's coming out. It's like you need the rub of people, and I wasn't without atmosphere, but it just seemed to be the fundamental point of what going out is about just seemed to be totally missing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a place for those sort of places, but I don't think they would pretend to be trying to replace clubbing. They're doing the best with what they can under the circumstances, and there's certainly venues like that in London that are very, very similar. The Cause have kind of converted their terrace into something similar to that. I mean, it's really, really hard to say, but I've got to say the fact that there's been a new vaccine announced today and there was a vaccine announced last week is huge, because the one today is 94% effective, and also is more easily transportable because it doesn't have to be kept at -80. So I think this one is probably even more promising than the one last week. And also apparently it works on elderly people as well. I mean, I can't believe that we've come to know so much about vaccinations. It's pretty ridiculous, really. But I've always watched the news quite closely, but over the past 8 months, it's been fairly obsessive, really, hasn't it? Just kind of what's going to happen next, and in the middle of this, the US election, which is even more bonkers. So there's just all of this kind of crazy stuff happening. I can't keep my eyes off the news.
Oh God, I know. It's exhausting, isn't it? I think I had a day last week when I actually managed to look at the news the first thing in the morning and last thing at night. But otherwise, the election is like every 15 minutes, 10 minutes, you just renew. Oh God!
Yeah, I mean, I've started following Donald Trump just to see what mania is going on, and he's completely insane, isn't he? Yeah, you think, how the hell have they got this guy? Why did they elect him? It's mental.
Well,
I know we've got a terrible government, but at least they're kind of halfway sentient.
Well, there's this kind of cultural thing, isn't there? I mean, I kind of read it because I guess we grow up in such an American culture, and you kind of, in a way, we think of ourselves quite close to America, in many ways. But then, like the gun thing, and I've kind of wrestled with trying to understand it. And then about a couple of years ago, I thought, I just don't get it. And I have to let that it's a cultural divide that I'm never going to get, and accept that. And it's the same with the election, because you think, 70-odd million people have voted for Trump. You just think, I just cannot understand how anyone ever would vote for him. You just have to go, I just don't get it, and that's fine.
I mean, I understand a certain sector of society in America voting for him. The evangelicals, for example, which is a pretty big block, because he's really supported the church and in particular the kind of the lunatic fringe of the church in America. And certain kind of left behind white groups and communities I can see. But I see all over Twitter like black vehement defenders of Trump. And you're just like, he doesn't give a shit about you. He actually doesn't even like you. And yet you're defending him like he's a deity. That's what I really don't understand. That's really bizarre. But their idea of what socialism is just fucking comical, because they're completely convinced that Joe Biden is some radical Marxist. And it's like, he couldn't be further from the bloody truth. I mean, he'd be seen as a right-wing Labour candidate here, wouldn't he? And yet there he's seen as pretty much, Karl Marx.
Yeah, I know it is. Yeah, it is. And yeah, I mean, and each country has a version of left wing. I mean, you look at all Scandinavian governments, are all pretty left wing. If they were, running for power here, it'd be like, oh my God, the bloody, lefty lunatics.
Exactly.
But anyway, going back to your early career. So did you grow up in Grimsby and Cleethorpes?
Well, Grimsby Cleethorpes is really one town, to be honest. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like Brighton and Hove. You might live in Hove, but you'd say that you lived in Brighton, if just to outsiders, because it's effectively one big conurbation. So Grimsby Cleethorpes is just one big conurbation. When I was first born, we lived in Cleethorpes for the first year, and then we moved into a house in Grimsby. So I grew up in Grimsby.
And how was it growing up? How was growing up in Grimsby?
Well, when you don't have anything to compare it with, it is what it is, isn't it? When you're a child, you accept your lot, and so it was okay. I mean, it's not the most exciting town. There wasn't a great deal happening. We didn't have a proper record shop for a start, so. So when I got older, I started when I got older, I moved to London. That's what I did. I mean,
how old were you when you moved to London?
17. So I left school at 15 with no qualifications. I did really badly at school and had a few run-ins with the police for like shoplifting and criminal damage and stuff like that. But really, and I went to school on a council estate, which was the council estate they built when they did the slum clearance around the docks. So a lot of families that had lived around the docks all got moved to this council estate where I went to school. So it was actually a brand new school and a brand new council estate when I went to school there. It's looking quite dilapidated now. But so when I started in the first year, that was the only year at school, and then the school gradually filled up, and we were the top year every year. But it wasn't great. But I only can see that since I've, moved out of Grimsby and see how other people are educated and the relative privileges that they have growing up in more affluent areas and so on. It seemed okay to me at the time, though. I had no kind of awareness that we were particularly economically disadvantaged or anything like that, because everybody was in the same boat, really. It's just a typical working class town, really, like Rochdale or Workington or any one of a number of northern towns that are very, very similar.
So presumably it was a matter of you were like, I just got to leave. I want to get out as quick as I can and see the great wide world.
Well, yeah. I mean, I wasn't really thinking that to start with when I first left school, but I when I left school, I went to an FE college for 2 years to train to be a chef. And I was very lucky that in the first year that I was at college, I had a really amazing, inspiring teacher. And he kind of pretty much changed my life, because he really got us to kind of broaden our horizons. And instead of looking at where we'd work in the Grimsby and Cleethorpes area, he was like, fuck that. He's like, go to the library, get the Egon Rone Good Food Guide, and pick the best 100 restaurants and hotels and send a letter to every one of them, and I'll guarantee that you'll be offered a job. And he was right. I got offered a job in the Berkeley Hotel, which is where Marcus Waring is the head chef. I got offered a job there as an apprentice. So that's what I did. And also punk was happening around the time that I was at FE College. So there were two things happening at the same time. This guy teaching me and the Sex Pistols, basically. And I just wanted to be at the epicenter of punk rock. And
so what year did you move to London then?
April 1977. Oh
God, so you were in the thick of it then?
Yeah, absolutely. Like first week I was, it was amazing because we had a few gigs happening in Grimsby. Sex Pistols played at Cleethorpes Winter Gardens in the December of 76, and then later on the Stranglers and a few other bands came through. But like in London, it was like every night, the Marquee, Hammersmith Odeon, Hammersmith Palais, the Red Cow in Hammersmith, the Nashville in West Kensington, the Marquee in Wardour Street, the Moonlight Club in West Hampstead. I mean, just all of these places. So if I was on an early shift, because we used to do a late shift one way and an early the next, I would just be out 2 or 3 times a week, going to see Buzzcocks and The Fall and whoever else was happening, Susie and the Banshees and stuff like that.
And once the kind of the initial rush of punk had gone, could you see? I mean, how exciting was it musically? Because it was it was all right energy, and then I guess it started moving into that more interesting stuff, the whole post-punk thing. And were you in the thick of that as well? I mean, were you consciously like, oh right, something interesting is starting to happen here?
It happened really gradually, actually, and it was part of the continuum of punk. And I wouldn't have said that I was necessarily listening to totally a completely different style of music, but when there was certain records that came out that really caught my ear. Being Boiled by Human League was a really big record at the time for me, and I went to see them play at the Marquee when that single came out. The Normal, TVOD and Warm Leatherette, Nag 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 by Cabaret Voltaire, the first Gang of Four EP on Fast Records, the one with the red and black cover, with Damaged Goods EP, I think it was called. And then also other things were happening like Two Tone and the Mod Revival, and so there were lots of different things happening in parallel. But I got bored of the thrash of punk quite quickly and was definitely moving on to more adventurous and more experimental music. 23 Skidoo, A Certain Ratio. I mean, A Certain Ratio were really important to me in terms of moving towards black music, I suppose. I mean, because I was buying their releases, and in interviews they'd mention, well, first of all they'd mention Yankees in Manchester, which I didn't know about and had never heard of, and they started talking about Cutouts, which I'd never heard of, and then they were name checking bands like Spunk and Cameo and who I'd never heard of. Cameo they hadn't had a hit at that stage. So I started looking for 7 inches and albums by these bands that A Certain Ratio were name checking. That's really how I got into black music, was by buying Cameo and Spunk records, because A Certain Ratio mentioned them in interviews.
Spunk, I've not heard of Spunk. Good, amazing name.
they're on a little American label called Gold Coast, and they only did one album. And they morphed into a disco band. I can't remember which one now, but
right.
If you have a look on Discogs, they've got other history as well. But so that was my kind of introduction to it. And then I just started looking randomly on. My dad lived in Leeds, so I used to go and stay with him for the weekend, and then go to the warehouse. And there was a really good stall on Leeds Market that sold 7 inches, and I'd just buy funk records from there.
And were you going out to dance clubs around this time as well? I mean, was that, going from punk to back clubs is like, it's kind of well, I guess not that big a leap, but you know what I mean? It's like opposite ends of the spectrum, I guess.
Yeah, the 3 years that I lived in London, from 77 to 1980, I never went to a dance club at all. I only going to gigs, and then I spent just over a year and a half cooking in Geneva in Switzerland, which was a bit of a cultural and musical desert, really. But I did used to travel a little bit to Lyon to see us Talking Heads play on the Remain in Light tour. I saw the Clash play on the Sandinista tour in the same venue. But what happened was I moved back home and I moved back to Grimsby because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And punk had sort of fired my imagination without me really thinking about what I could do as a career. And I didn't have any qualifications, so my options were relatively limited. But as soon as I moved back, some friends of mine that had been in a punk band said, "Do you want to start a band?" And so I got involved in this band, and that was the kind of start of my musical adventures, I suppose.
Was that group therapy, expanding wallets, or the undertones?
It was, well, the proper group. Well, that was group therapy, which was actually a pretty great group. I mean, there were some really good musicians in it. The sax player in group therapy has subsequently gone on to play in Amy Winehouse's band.
Oh wow! Okay.
Played in Matthew Herbert's big band and played in BBC orchestras and stuff like that. So there were some really good musicians in that band. I hate to add, I wasn't one of them. I was a terrible singer and a mediocre percussionist, but but that kind of gave me a thirst for having a go, and I suppose my career has been personified by having a go.
Well, yeah, don't we all? It's like, so if I go in the studio, people go, "What do you play?" I'm like, "Oh God, I can't play anything."
Exactly, that's what musicians are for.
Yes, well, there you go. Yeah. Joe, the bit I'm interested. How did you get into the whole DMC kind of working for DMC and going over to America? Okay,
so I moved back down to London in 1987, and I moved back down to do a degree as a mature student at the Polytechnic of North London. But almost as soon as I moved down, I saw an advert in a football magazine called When Saturday Comes, advertising for a slave, and I answered this ad.
Great. Oh God,
said,
I've always
wanted
wanted
to college near your offices. I could come in a couple of days and help out, and so I think they like the fact that I supported a shit football team. First of all, because When Saturday Comes was quite an egalitarian football magazine, and the two guys running it supported Everton and Chelsea. So I think one of the reasons I got the job as slave was because I supported a shit team. Anyway, I started getting involved in that, and that sort of very quickly took over the whole of my life. So even though I was at college, I was completely disinterested in college because I was only going to do a degree so that I could do something more interesting with my life. But actually, I'd sort of looked out working at this magazine for free. I thought, this is it. This is what I want to do. I want to run a football magazine, and I want to work for this football magazine. So I worked there for 2 years without earning any money, and eventually it just started really taking off. We organised a trip to Albania when Albania was still a communist country, and we got loads of publicity for it. We were on News at 10, and we were on Pebble Mill at 1, and the magazine doubled its circulation in the space of about 2 months. So we were able to start paying ourselves, and from then on, that was it. I worked full time for the magazine and dropped out of college, and I never finished the degree. But while I was doing that, Nick Gordon Brown, who worked at DMC and was assistant editor at Mixmag, and Dave Seaman, who was editor of Mixmag and worked at DMC, they got in touch with me and said, we really love When Saturday Comes, and do you fancy doing some bits about football for Mixmag? And then we got talking, and they realised that I was into dance music, and I had decks, and I was going out clubbing, and so they were like, oh right, okay, do you want to write for Mixmag then? So that's how the hookup with Mixmag came. And then I left When Saturday Comes in the autumn of 1993, and DMC asked me if I'd like to come and work for them. So I edited Mixmag Update for about a year. Well, not a year, actually. It was about 7 or 8 months. But I edited Mixmag Update, and then a position came up in New York to run the DMC office there, and they asked me if I wanted to go out there and do that. So that's how it happened. So it was through working at this football magazine and then working.
So what year was that you first started working for Mixmag then?
1990, I started writing for them. Might even have been 1989, but I think it was 1990.
And were you on the whole kind of acid house explosion thing right from the off?
No, but I was into clubbing. I was going out from... I started going out clubbing end of 81, really, when I got back from Switzerland. And I'd been going to clubs in Switzerland as well, but they were really shit. So I can't even count them as clubs. So from 81 onwards, I was going clubbing seriously. I had friends that were at university in Manchester and university in Nottingham. So I used to go to the garage in Nottingham. I used to go to the Hacienda before Acid House. I used to go to the Hacienda. So I'd go and see bands there, like a certain ratio I went to see there and stuff like that. And I used to go to the warehouse in Leeds because my dad lived in Leeds. And I'd go out there was like a night on a Friday and a night on a Saturday at the warehouse. So I'd been going out, but I didn't really like house music when I first heard it. I remember going out to the Fridge it would have been September 1987, and a friend of mine, a guy called Adrian, was the resident at the Fridge. So I went and hung out with him in the DJ booth there, and Mark Moore was the guest, and Mark Moore played like 2 hours of house music, and I was like, what the fuck is this racket? Because prior to that, you went in a club and you played a bit of hip hop, a bit of go-go, maybe a bit of indie. You played a bit of everything. Do you know what I mean? Some soul, and that's how it was in those days. So for someone to come in and just play 2 hours of one kind of music was it felt really confrontational. And I when I interviewed Mark later on, I said, this was my experience. And he was like, he said it was deliberately confrontational. It was like he was on a mission. But it really alienated me at the time. So for the next year and a half, I kind of avoided house clubs, and I was just going to like rare groove parties and stuff like that. And then my ex-girlfriend had been going to Solaris and a few other places, and she said, do you fancy coming to this club with me? And the club was called Troll, which was a gay acid house club at the back of Heaven. And when we got there, she's like, they're selling ecstasy. Do you want to try some ecstasy? So I was like, yeah, all right, whatever. So that was it. After that was my kind of Damascene moment. And then... So that was like summer of 1989, and then from there I went every week to that club until it closed pretty much. And in fact I didn't really go to any straight clubs for about a year and a half. I was obsessed with going to gay clubs. So I missed out on Shum, I missed out on The Trip, I missed out on Spectrum, I missed out on all of these things because I was only going to gay clubs, and these were all straight clubs.
Yeah. And then it is quite amazing. I didn't realise you were so kind of in the thick of punk. But so basically you were kind of, you actually surfed the youth movement thing, the two biggest kind of arguably youth movements of the last, musical whatever. I mean, punk and acid house. Having to experience them both is quite something, I think.
Yeah, well, I was really lucky because when punk was happening, I was 17, which was a perfect age for punk to happen. And then when the mod revival happened and Two Tone, I was 19, and I loved both of those things as well. And then I was really into the new romantic scene in about 81, 82. Dyeing my hair and having really foppish haircuts and stuff like that. So I've kind of been through a few things. I mean, I was into hip hop as well, but I never really stylistically bought into hip hop. I was just more into the records. I wasn't breakdancing on lino or any of that kind of stuff. But yeah, to go from punk into house, and what's funny is, I don't think I was alone, because there were people like Andrew Weatherall and Chris Needs, and there's plenty of people. This guy Paul, what's his name, that ran RIP parties, he's an ex-punk as well. So there's quite a lot of ex-punks that were involved in house music. And it seemed obvious to me that it was sort of a bit like a black punk rock. It was quite anti-music in a lot of ways. And when you listen to like the acid records and stuff like that, they're like the equivalent of the Angelic Upstarts of Chicago, aren't they? Those kind of records are like really basic but full of youthful energy. So to me, there seemed to be a lot of parallels between punk and house music. But also what I thought was that house music was actually more revolutionary, even though it was a mixture. The people involved in it were probably a mixture of entrepreneurs trying to make money and then rebels who were kind of anti-authoritarian. It was a mixture of those two things, whereas I think punk was more obviously political. I think house, in a quieter way, was perhaps more revolutionary because it was more independent. You know, the first thing that most punk bands did as soon as they got the chance was to sign to a major label. Whereas you look at what was happening with British house music and acid house, was a lot of it was coming out on white labels. And for years and years and years, it was ages before major labels learned how to capitalize on dance music. Most of it was really being run by people who just started their own record labels. So to me, it was more radical.
Yeah, you kind of hear when Future acid tracks came out, it was unbelievable. It was like it totally recalibrated what music was and what music could be. So I think for that reason, it felt like something hugely different, other than punk, which was essentially still, kind of three chords and a drummer kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, punk. I mean, on reflection, at the time I was 17, so I didn't know that much about music really. But when you reflect back, it wasn't that different from things that had been before, rock and roll and MC5 and all kinds of stuff. Whereas electronic music and house music and techno was suddenly there were hooks coming from hi-hat patterns and 303s and all kinds of non-musical sort of things. So it wasn't anti-musical, but it was often quite amusical, and that I found quite appealing because it was something that really split my generation off from the previous generation. I had so many arguments with my friends at the time because how old was I? I was 27 or 28 when I first went to like a house night. So I wasn't young particularly. So all of my friends were like, this is a fucking racket. I'm not having anything to do with this. And I got involved. I just remember so many arguments with friends of mine, and especially ones that were a little bit older and therefore were even more cut off from kind of youth culture. I remember having these really, really long, pointless arguments with people who were like 30 and 31 and just thought they just thought it was beyond the pale that someone like me could even like it. So yeah, it was an age divider and a generation divider in a way that I don't think you get now. I think the things that divide generations now are to do with technology and gaming and things like that and TikTok. Whereas music is, I don't sense a generation gap between me and my kids with music.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, you're right. I think with a lot of kind of creative stuff, and I think maybe how scenes grow has got something to do with that as well, with the advent of the internet. And you think how all those old music scenes, and it would be turned into a word of mouth thing, and you were kind of in the club or out the club, and then suddenly it would explode onto the scene, and that's just not going to happen again, I don't think.
I think the internet has fundamentally kind of changed how youth culture is, because things would sort of slowly emerge and then explode. But I mean, because of the internet of the way it is, people can just go delving back into history. So you've got kids that are 18 and are incredibly knowledgeable about 60s music or 50s music or 80s music or whatever, because you've got Spotify and you can just sit there, pounding through Spotify, and you can acquire an incredible amount of knowledge now thanks to the internet in a way that you never could when I was a teenager. I mean, you really had to put the work in to find music and listen to it and learn about it. I mean, it was an arduous process. Yeah, I remember being friendly with Todd Terrier when he was a teenager still, actually, and he was just starting to hang out on the DJ history board, and just his ability to go from being an 18-year-old and fairly clueless to being unbelievably knowledgeable by the time he was 21 was incredible, because there's just no way you could have done that at my age. You had to painstakingly go to record stores and listen to records and buy them, and slowly amass this information. But he was like on a crash course, and he just sped past lots of people because the internet was there.
Where's the fun now, though? Where's the fun in the internet, eh? Kids? Hey, God, don't I look at the hell.
I don't know. I feel quite envious that they're able to do that, because, when I was living in Grimsby in the 80s, when I moved back to Grimsby, and I was in a band, and I used to hitchhike to Nottingham to go to Selector Disc, because we didn't have a record store in Grimsby, so it was desperate.
So I just go back to you moved to America, and I was just wondering, it's interesting because I kind of did a bit of research, and it's interesting. How did that feel to you? Because over here, it was like going to certainly, going to Hard Times and Ministry as well. You would have these kind of, the thought of an American DJ coming over slightly blew your mind. It was like, oh, that's kind of where it's all come from. And what was it like? And I imagine they were looking over here going, oh my God, we can get paid like a lot more than 50 quid for DJing on a Wednesday. People are into it rather than this kind of who gives a shit thing. So what was it like kind of having access into that, right into the middle of it from the other end kind of thing?
It was completely mind-blowing and slightly bewildering, because New York house music in particular was what I was really, really into. And I'd been over a couple of times. I had a friend that used to work at the garage in Nottingham who moved over because his wife was a fashion designer. And I bunked on his sofa a few times and spent a lot of time spending money in Vinyl Mania and places like that. So I'd been a few times. But when I went over there, they had a welcoming party for me in the venue where they shot Saturday Night Fever in Brooklyn.
Of course they did. I mean, what else would you expect? I mean, obviously, where's my welcome party?
And Frankie Knuckles was at the welcome party, and Benji Candelario, and just Peter Dow and Vanessa. I mean, it was just completely mind-blowing. So I went from hero worshipping all of these people to like hanging out with them in the space of a fortnight, because DMC told me on the Thursday that this job was available, and then I had to move the following Friday, so I had 8 days notice. So it all happened really, really quickly. And I mean, how the music industry is actually quite little, isn't it? The dance music scene, you get to know people quite quickly, but in New York it was even smaller. I mean, it was tiny. So within a fortnight, I met everyone. I mean, literally everyone. Louis Vega, Kenny Dope. Because on a Friday, they'd all hang out at For the Record, which was Judy Weinstein's record pool, and they'd all go and pick up their records for the weekend and everything. But people would be sat nattering and, around kind of tea time on a Friday, if you went and hung out there, you literally would see every major DJ in the whole of the tri-state area. I mean, it was a proper Junior Vasquez, Frankie Knuckles, whoever was in New York at the time, they'd be there. So it was pretty mind-blowing for me. I mean, it was like Stella Street for DJs.
And what were the clubs like? So did you go to Paradise Garage? And presumably that had finished by that time.
That had finished. That closed 87. So
right. So was Zanzibar, was that going? Was that
Zanzibar
slightly off with all my dates on this? But
Zanzibar, I think, was just about going, but was kind of on its last legs.
Right.
I never went to Zanzibar. Frank did. The big club that we all went to was the Sound Factory on a Saturday. So that was our religion. Every Saturday we go to that. The other places that were open and happening, the Roxy on a Friday, had a good night. The Tunnel, which was a mixture of hip hop and house. And then the other big venue was the Sound Factory Bar. They had an industry night called Underground Network on a Wednesday. With Louis Vega as resident, and then on a Friday, Frankie Knuckles was the resident. So there weren't loads of things, but there was enough. There was enough good stuff to kind of go out all the time.
Well, me from our point of view and Paper's point of view, me and Miles went to the Sound Factory on can you remember that Hoover trip that they did?
Yes.
Basically, if you bought a Hoover...
I got scammed on that because it was oversubscribed, wasn't it? And they couldn't fulfill all the... I bought a Hoover and never got the bloody flight.
Oh, well, I got a Hoover for my sister for Christmas, and then me and Miles went to Sound Factory, basically, because of that. And it totally transformed. It was like, oh, so this is... What are they playing? I remember they played... It was a Beloved track. I can't remember which one it was. I remember thinking... Oh shit! This is it. This is it. And we came back. We were quite evangelical about it. In fact, it probably might have even been before Paper. Anyway, it definitely totally recalibrated the air horn thing. So we came back, and for Roma Disco, we immediately got an air horn. And it was amazing actually. But how was that kind of day to day? Because here, obviously, Acid House was just going bananas with drugs and all the rest of it. And over there, I mean, I presumed it was kind of more of a gay scene and... Yeah.
It was happening, but it wasn't the same as the UK. There weren't any good straight clubs. I mean, all the clubs we went to were essentially gay. Underground Network was an industry night, but I mean, most of the people in the industry were gay. So... I'd say the industry in dance music industry in New York is probably 65-70% gay. So if you went out to an industry thing, you would go into a gay party, basically. Almost everyone that I was friends with was gay. I mean, there were some straight people like Louis Vega and Kenny Dope and David Morales, but I mean, most people were gay. It was different. It was still quite druggy, but it was much more gay. And the drugs were better, generally, and more organised. It was before mobile phones had taken off. They're quite slow to get mobile phones in the States. So what everyone had was a pager. And if you wanted drugs, you'd page a number, and then a guy would turn up in a suit with a briefcase, looking like a businessman, and then he'd open the briefcase, and there'd be everything from like heroin and crack down to, weed and hash and whatever, and then you'd buy it, and off you go.
God, crazy! It just feels. Well, it was. I mean, it's such different times, and it was a long time ago now, isn't it? I guess yeah. And how were they?
The other thing that you had then, because it was while New York was becoming more gentrified, but was still a bit dirty and dangerous. So Alphabet City was still a bit of not a no-go area exactly, but certainly it was dealers on every corner, and certainly wasn't it's quite a nice place to go now. I bet I went there last time I was in New York just to see what it was like, and it's all been really gentrified. But there used to be like illegal drinking dens in Alphabet City. There was a Coke den called Frank's Place, and you could go there and basically you could buy drugs over the counter and do them in this place. But hilariously, he wouldn't allow swearing. If you swore, he'd boot you out. But you could do lines of coke on a table.
Yeah. Oh, jeez. And presumably they were, blown away by being able to come over to the UK. I mean, were they excited about what was happening over here?
Yeah, well, they were. Yeah, I mean, they were very proud of the kind of New York traditions, and it did fit. I mean, that's really what inspired me and Frank to write Last Night a DJ Saved My Life was seeing the kind of pride in the oral history tradition that they had in New York, and it just seemed criminal that no one was documenting it, which is, that was really the starting point of writing that book. So they were really proud of the culture that they'd come from and were really acutely aware of it. But at the same time, they obviously loved the fact that in the UK and Italy and Germany and these places, they could go over and earn a lot of money as well. There was a big demand for New York DJs. When you saw the way that they were schooled and how well trained they were, you could understand it. They'd come from a very competitive tradition where in those days, it was still one DJ playing in one club all night. There was none of this guest DJ thing. It was Junior playing for 12 hours or Danny Tenaglia playing for 8 hours or Louis Vega playing for 7 hours or whatever it was. But it was like one DJ and that's it. And I'm sure if you're playing regularly those kind of sets, that really teaches you an awful lot about timing, about pacing, about when to play the right records and when not to play the right, when to calm it down. And just generally the pacing of an evening is much more important when you're playing all night. Whereas when you're playing for 2 hours, you're trying to hit those peak moments while your set is on, inevitably. But it is a completely different experience being in the sound factory for 10 hours and watching one DJ control the whole environment. I mean, it's really quite an inspiring thing.
Well, it was kind of that long sets that were kind of unheard of over here. I mean, I'm trying to remember if anyone was doing that, and I can't.
But it was like that. When I first started going out to the warehouse and to the garage, that there was only like you go in one room and there was one DJ. That guest thing was really a product of Acid House more than anything.
And when did you write the book? So it's Last Night DJ Saved My Life was first, was it?
Well, we actually wrote a book called The Manual before that, which was a kind of a cash-in book that the Ministry of Sound commissioned us to write. So me and Frank wrote that in about 3 or 4 months. We kind of did it as an experiment to see if we could write together and make it work, and it went pretty well. So, and the guy that published that said, we're really happy with what you've done. Have you got any ideas for books? And that's how Last Night a DJ Saved My Life happened. So we wrote that. We started work on it in the summer of '98 and delivered it at the end of May '99, and it was published in September, October '99.
And when did the record players come along?
About 10 years ago. But I mean, we did How to DJ Properly as well.
Right.
How to DJ Properly was the follow-up, I suppose, to Last Night. That came out in 2003.
And having read, a bit of stuff, so that was a conscious effort for you to, readdress the kind of the non-dance music coverage.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, we always felt slightly aggrieved that people wrote about it and often got loads of things wrong, often factually inaccurate. I mean, Paradise Garage in New Jersey and Paradise Garage here and there, and dates and times and locations and everything was all skew with. And also we just felt that the music that we were really into and really loved, because it was mainly body music rather than cerebral music in the way that Bob Dylan or Neil Young might be described as, that it was treated as a poor cousin, and I thought that was really wrong. This music is as beautiful and uplifting as any rock record, but it's consumed because it's consumed in a different way. I don't think it just had the respect that it deserved. And also, we really wanted to kind of re-establish disco at the heart of the history of dance music, because really it's the foundation of pretty much everything that we've got now. And it had been a dirty word for so long, and we kind of, one of the main tenets of the book was to kind of re-establish it as something that was cherishable and important and historic.
Well, it did, yeah, and I think it did. I mean, you look at now, there's so many books on dance music, and I think that everyone's caught up with it, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I don't think anyone would dispute that now, but we were definitely the first people to kind of say, hold on a minute, it's not Yes Sir, I Can Boogie by Baccarat. It's much more than that. It's all of this culture, and there's an amazing history to it.
Also, maybe that generational thing of the people who are writing books and printing magazines and everything were, of a type, basically middle-aged men who possibly were less inclined to kind of, be involved in black gay music or youth culture music or whatever.
Well, I mean, if you look at the kind of gatekeepers of popular music in the UK, they are essentially white middle-class men, and so it does mean that there's always been huge gaps in how they covered popular music. I mean, not all of them. When I was a teenager, I used to read Danny Baker's stuff in the NME, and he was regularly writing about salsa, for example, and all kinds of stuff. So, it's not all white middle class. Yeah,
I know.
But they did dominate the culture, definitely.
And was there anyone in the record players you got starstruck with? Was there anyone you'd be like, oh God, meeting that thing of don't meet your heroes?
Not really, because I think a lot of if you think about all the people that we met for that and for last night, we were really exhuming people that had been forgotten by everybody for the most part. I mean, in the later chapters we interviewed people like Sasha, who were big stars then and obviously still are. But equally, we were kind of tracking down people that like Terry Noel that no one had ever heard of. At that time, Francis Grasso, no one had heard of. He was very obscure. So a lot of the people that we were interviewing were really people that most people had forgotten about, if they ever even knew about them. So, and that actually felt really exciting. It felt like we were kind of shining a light on corners of dance music that had been long forgotten.
And it must have been great for them as well to have people showing interest, and then and I think a lot of those people have kind of they've been written into history by you kind of started the ball rolling, and I think everyone has caught up with it. Yeah,
no, absolutely. It's not. I mean, it's obviously not just us now, because Tim Lawrence has done a really good job of documenting those things as well, and other people have written really, really good books about that as well. I don't want to just say that.
No, I'm not saying that.
We were certainly the first people there in the modern era to write about it, but we're not the only ones. And I think all of those people writing one after the other just kind of re-establishes the importance of certain parts of the dance music culture, which is great, because people do know it now. There's no excuse not to know about it.
Yeah. And you're ahead of the curve also, DJ history. The whole forum thing. Oh, you could have been Facebook, Bill.
I know. Well, it was quite mad at one stage. I mean,
that is it. Again, you kind of forget. I was just thinking about it. You're like, actually, it was quite, not a big deal, but it was definitely, at the leading edge of that kind of stuff. Because, I guess it was one of those things you didn't have to do. And it's interesting looking back on it. It feels very old-fashioned, but then you put it in the context, it feels very kind of, forward-thinking as well.
Well, it was a happy accident, really. I'd been hanging out on a few forums myself in the late 90s, like the Soul Strut forum in the States, and the Deep House Pages forum in the States as well. and there was a British one called Vinyl Vulture that I used to hang out on as well. And I thought it'd be really cool if we had a little forum. So we built the site in 2000, but we didn't have the forum until 2003, and that's when the site really started taking off. It was the forum really that built that site. Just it became a bit of a phenomenon.
How many people were on it? How many users did you have at its peak?
About 20,000, something like that.
Yeah, all the great and the good.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible. The amount of people that were on there, it was amazing. I mean, people like David Mancuso would pop up occasionally. You're like, bloody hell, this is nuts. Yeah. So it was amazing.
And the whole kind of I mean, you had books, downloads, all sorts of things, and the low life parties. I mean, it was quite a little cottage industry going.
It was. The problem with it as a business, though, was that all the things that the successful things that we did were all physical products, and our idea of the site was to somehow make money from the digital side of it, because making physical products is actually it's very labor intensive, publishing books and releasing records and all that kind of stuff. And we got bogged down in a lot of that. I mean, I'm really proud of the books that we did. I think they're all really, really good books. We only published 5, but I mean, the 5th one kind of killed off the site really because it sold really badly, and we'd invested quite a lot of money in it. So yeah, our cash flow kind of drained, and it coincided with the big crash, the big stock market crash. In fact, launching it as a commercial venture was just as the economy was collapsing. So we launched it at a terrible time as well.
Yeah. And have you got any more books? Are you writing any more? Have you got anything on the go? Well, last time I saw you, you had a secret project, and that was a few years ago.
Well, yeah, that one is on the back burner, but it is a possibility. But yeah, we've got a book idea, which I don't really want to talk about until we've actually done it. But yeah, we've got a book idea, and we're doing an updated version of Last Night a DJ Saved My Life, which is going to come out next autumn.
Right.
So yeah, I've got more books, more book ideas on the go. All the ones that I have are kind of dance music, electronic music related as well. I kind of feel like that's my little corner, and I'm just continuing to mine it until we hit dirt and there's no more gold left.
But it's interesting hearing your 16 loop things, because I'm always slightly in awe of people who have such a big capacity for music. Giles Peterson's another one. I listen to his show and I just think, how do you fit it all in your brain? I mean, I kind of listen to a lot of music and I kind of know some stuff, but then there's something about being able to retain all that information. I kind of don't know how you do it.
Yeah, it's been a challenge actually, because it's completely different to like a normal, like if you're DJing every weekend, you can often play quite similar sets depending on which clubs you're playing in. Your set will develop over months and months and months, doesn't it? As you like play one thing over and over again, and then new things come in every week, and it gradually morphs. But if you're playing every week to essentially the same crowd, you have to try and find new ways of presenting that music. So I'm really conscious of the fact that I can't play exactly the same set every week. I have to find different ways of varying it and changing it up. So it is, but I quite enjoy the challenge of that actually. It's quite a fun thing to do, to just not completely change it, but keep altering it so that it doesn't get too repetitive.
You go further into these little niches until it's like the mining for gold in your area. You'll just you would have done them all, run out of genres.
Well, yeah, there's that as well. I'm enjoying. It's making me kind of dig much deeper than I would do normally. It's been quite instructive, really, and I've enjoyed doing that. So I'm pulling out things that I'd forgotten that I even had.
Well, I guess it's that curation thing, which you seem to have found a little niche for as well. Again, which is it's that licensing and having enough knowledge Well, having people be able to approach you to be able to, import your knowledge. I mean, it's a further kind of, it's furthering of a DJ taste, isn't it? We talk about gatekeepers and then this world of everything's available, but that's not necessarily a good thing. I think it's the function of a record label as well, in that you're basically saying, this is what we do and what we present is good, and people go, right, fine, I'll take that, rather than being presented with a gazillion tracks on Spotify.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I love putting compilations together still, because I think there is space and there is room for curating things in a concise way. Picking a particular area of music or a style of music or a producer or whatever, and presenting a nice little set of music. I've just finished a 3 CD compilation for Cherry Red, actually, that's coming out in February, which is sort of danceable post-punk, the sort of funky end of post-punk. So 23 Skidoo, A Certain Ratio, all of that kind of gang. And it's like 50 tracks, I think. So
right.
I've just delivered the final track, actually, today. That's almost complete now. Yeah. And then I'm working on another compilation, which will come out sometime next year. A guy called Tony Wilson, not the Manchester Tony Wilson, a black songwriter and producer called Tony Wilson, who was a founder member of Hot Chocolate. So it's a compilation of his productions and songs that he wrote and stuff like that. So,
and you've been
I'm always looking for angles, basically.
And you've been doing more of your own edits. I mean, we were kind of, because we've been putting bits and bobs out, and Chris has with Sprechen and stuff. So what's that? Is that something is that a conscious thing, or you just kind of noodle away and do stuff for your own fun and it ends up coming out?
I do. Most of them I never intend to release. I do them because I think they can improve what I do as a DJ. But then Chris approached me and said, have you got any stuff lying about? Well, I'm like, well, yeah, I've got like about 150. I just kind of have a look and see what I've got, send some stuff over to him and see if he likes it. So, yeah, I mean, I've got loads and loads and loads.
And so going forward, so you're going to write a book and anything else kind of,
well, write a book. I've just finished working on a remix of Krangbin with Raj Raymang, which we delivered today. What else? I'm always doing stuff. It's somehow or other my days get filled. At the moment, I'm working on a book with Late Night Tales. They're putting out every one of their releases in a big wooden box set next year. It's going to retail for Christ knows how much, and there's going to be a book in it, and I'm helping him put the book together. So I'm in the middle of doing interviews for that. So yeah, that's occupying me at the moment. I interviewed Norman Cook on Friday, interviewed Lindstrom yesterday. I interviewed Joseph from Metronomy the week before. I've just been like hammering the interviews, one after the other.
Oh, how's Hans Peter doing?
Yeah, he's good. He was complaining about the weather, and he seems all right. He said he's just been doing what he normally does, but not earning any money.
He's such a nice chap.
you know what it's like in Norway. There's a bit of a support network for creative people. So, but he did say you need to be kind of slightly established in your field before you get any help, but then you get really good help from the government. I don't quite know how it works, but there's definitely subsidies available, aren't there, in Norway for like DJs and musicians and stuff?
Yeah, do you know what? I'm due a catch up with a couple of them, but yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, apart from anything else, they have a really good social security thing, so no one falls through the cracks, I think, quite like they do here.
Oh yeah. I mean, they've got like a high taxation system, haven't they? So there's a lot of kind of family support and social support.
Yeah. I've kind of I've just been. I've not had my eyes on the scene quite like I did have. I guess I kind of gorged on it a bit too much, and I've not heard too much of. Yeah, still in touch with Per and Bjorn and a couple of the others, but
yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think who I'm in regular contact with there. Prince Thomas a bit. The person I speak to most is probably Paul Strangefruit.
Oh, how's he do? Oh, yeah, because he did a thing. I listened to his mix actually on your.
I mean, me and him sort of swap messages and stuff like that. Yeah, he's all right. I mean, the same as everybody else, really. Just
buggering on.
Yeah, waiting for it all to bloody finish.